When an empath suddenly goes quiet, most people assume they're giving up or shutting down. But Carl Jung discovered something far more disturbing. That silence isn't weakness. It's a psychological warning shot. Jung called it the introversion of libido, where energy withdraws from the external world to process reality internally. What looks like silence is actually the empath's consciousness performing a massive internal audit. And when that audit is complete, nothing in the relationship will ever be the same again. Most people miss the warning signs completely. They think the empath is just being moody or tired or needs space. But Jung understood that when an empath goes quiet, they have entered what he called observation mode. The emotional filter has been removed. The projections have been withdrawn. For the first time, they're seeing you exactly as you are, without the lens of their own compassion softening the edges. And once an empath truly sees you without their projections, they can never unsee it. Society teaches us to fear confrontation and drama. So when the empath goes silent instead of fighting back, toxic people celebrate. They think they've won. They believe the empath has been broken, defeated, trained into submission. But Jung's research revealed something that should terrify manipulators everywhere. That silence isn't surrender. It's the calm before a storm they cannot possibly comprehend. Because while they're celebrating their apparent victory, the empath is doing something far more dangerous. They're thinking. The moment an empath withdraws their projections marks a fundamental shift in consciousness. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon in his clinical practice. He noticed a pattern that appeared again and again across multiple cases. Consider a composite example based on patterns Jung observed repeatedly. An empathic individual who had been giving and accommodating would reach a breaking point, but instead of the expected emotional breakdown, something else happened. They became preternaturally calm. Their eyes changed, their voice flattened, and everyone around them sensed that something profound and irreversible had occurred. Jung called this withdrawing projections, and he believed it was one of the most powerful psychological transformations a person could undergo. When we project onto others, we're essentially lending them our own positive qualities. We see them not as they are, but as we wish them to be. We attribute motivations to them that exist only in our own hearts. We excuse behaviors we would never tolerate in ourselves because we're projecting our own goodness onto them. The empath has been doing this their entire life, unconsciously, loaning out their compassion, their integrity, their kindness, and believing others possess these same qualities. But when an empath goes quiet, those projections get called back home. Suddenly, they're not seeing you through the filter of who they hoped you were. They're seeing you through the stark clarity of who you actually are. Your manipulations that they previously excused as misunderstandings become obvious patterns. Your lies that they wanted to believe become transparent contradictions. Your selfishness that they tried to justify becomes undeniable exploitation. And once an empath sees this clearly, no amount of charm, tears, or promises can restore the illusion. The silence is the physical manifestation of this process. While the empath sits quietly, appearing passive and defeated to outside observers, their mind is working at a level most people never access. They're replaying years of memories, but this time without the emotional filter that made them tolerable. Every conversation is being re-examined. Every excuse is being re-evaluated. Every moment when their intuition screamed danger, but they silenced it for your sake, is being reviewed with brutal honesty. Jung described this as the psychological accountant going through the books and realizing the numbers have never added up. The empath is connecting dots they previously ignored. The pattern of betrayals they excused as accidents reveals itself as a deliberate strategy. The moments when you made them feel crazy for trusting their perceptions are exposed as gaslighting. The times you accused them of being too sensitive are recognized as attempts to make them doubt their accurate readings of your behavior. And with each realization, the silence deepens. What makes this process so powerful is the exhaustion that precedes L. Jung observed that empaths don't reach this breaking point suddenly. They arrive at it after years of what modern psychology calls compassion fatigue. They've absorbed so much pain, carried so much emotional weight, made so many excuses for others' bad behavior, that their entire system finally says enough. The body keeps the score, as trauma researchers now understand. And when an empath's body has absorbed more pain than it can metabolize, it forces a shutdown that the conscious mind might have avoided indefinitely. This exhaustion manifests in ways that often go unrecognized. The empath becomes physically tired in ways that sleep doesn't fix. They feel emotionally numb, yet simultaneously overwhelmed. They start withdrawing from activities they once enjoyed, not because they've lost interest, but because they have no energy left after giving it all away. Their friends notice they're not themselves anymore. Their body sends signals through headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain. But still, they push forward, believing they just need to try harder, be better, give more. Until one day, they can't. The system crashes, and in that crash, the silence begins. This isn't a conscious choice the empath makes. It's an involuntary protective mechanism, the psyche's emergency shutdown to prevent complete psychological collapse. The empath hasn't chosen to go quiet. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Their nervous system has chosen it for them, recognizing what their conscious mind refused to acknowledge, that continuing to engage at the previous level will result in permanent damage. This is why the manipulator's usual tactics stop working during the silence. They try to provoke a reaction because they're used to the empath's emotional responsiveness. They manufacture crises, expecting the empath to rush in and rescue them, as always. They deploy guilt, playing on the empath's tendency to absorb blame. But something has fundamentally changed. The empath has entered what Jung called the incubation phase, and during this phase, they're immune to the manipulations that previously controlled them. Jung believed transformation happens in darkness and silence. Seeds germinate underground, butterflies metamorphose in cocoons, and empaths undergo their most profound psychological evolution in the quiet withdrawal from relationships that have been draining them. During this silence, the empath isn't just thinking about what happened. They're becoming someone new. They're integrating their shadow, the parts of themselves that society taught them to reject. For most of their lives, empaths have been praised for being nice, accommodating, understanding, forgiving. They've built their entire identity around being the person who cares, who helps, who never gives up on others. But this identity required them to reject crucial parts of themselves: their capacity for coldness, their ability to be selectively indifferent, their right to have boundaries so rigid that they exclude people permanently. Their shadow contains all these qualities, and during the silence, they're finally accepting them. This shadow integration is what makes the transformation permanent. The empath isn't just taking a break or processing their feelings. They're fundamentally restructuring their personality to include aspects of themselves they've denied their entire lives. They're accepting that they can be kind without being weak, compassionate without being naive, loving without being exploitable. And this acceptance changes everything about how they show up in the world. The process of shadow integration isn't comfortable. It requires the empath to confront aspects of themselves they've been taught are unacceptable. They must acknowledge that they're capable of saying no without explanation, that they can witness someone's pain without taking responsibility for fixing it, that they can choose their own well-being over someone else's comfort, that they can be ruthlessly honest about what they will and won't tolerate. These realizations feel selfish at first, because the empath has been conditioned to equate selflessness with virtue. But Jung understood that this so-called selfishness is actually psychological health. The empath is learning to distinguish between genuine compassion and compulsive caretaking, between authentic connection and codependent enmeshment, between love and self-abandonment. And these distinctions require them to embrace qualities they've previously rejected: the ability to be cold when coldness is warranted, detached when detachment is protective, and indifferent when indifference is the only sane response to dysfunction. Many people confuse this silence with the silent treatment, a manipulative tactic used to punish others. But Jung was very clear about the distinction. The silent treatment is about control and retaliation. It's saying, "I'm going to withhold communication until you submit to my demands." But the Jungian silence is completely different. It's not designed to punish the other person. It's not even about the other person at all. It's an act of profound self-preservation, the psyche's emergency shutdown to prevent further damage while it repairs what's been broken. The empath isn't trying to make you feel bad during this silence. They're not plotting revenge or planning how to hurt you. They're simply too exhausted to perform empathy anymore. The mask of endless understanding has become too heavy to wear. The role of emotional shock absorber has depleted them completely. And in the absence of the energy required to maintain these patterns, they become still. Not as a strategy, but as a biological necessity. What terrifies manipulators during this silence is something they feel but cannot articulate. They sense that the energy supply has been cut off. For months or years, they've been feeding on the empath's emotional responsiveness. Every time they created drama, the empath reacted. Every time they needed validation, the empath provided it. Every time they dumped their emotional garbage, the empath processed it for them. This exchange became so reliable that they built their entire psychological economy around it. But now the empath has gone dark, and the manipulator feels the absence, like an addict feels withdrawal. They can't explain why the silence bothers them so much. After all, they claim to want the empath to shut up, to stop being so sensitive, to quit making everything so complicated. But now that they have the silence they supposedly wanted, they're desperate to break it. Because the silence means they've lost access to something they were parasitically dependent on. We see this dynamic clearly in a narrative illustration Jung's theory helps us understand. Imagine someone who has spent years in a relationship where their emotional availability was exploited. Every boundary they attempted to set was met with accusations of being cold or unloving. Every time they expressed hurt, they were told they were too sensitive. Every instance of neglect or mistreatment was reframed as their fault for expecting too much. Over time, they learned to silence their own needs, to doubt their own perceptions, to accommodate behavior that violated their values. Then comes the moment of clarity. Perhaps it's a final betrayal that cannot be rationalized away. Perhaps it's simply the accumulation of thousands of small wounds reaching critical mass. Whatever the trigger, the empath suddenly sees the entire relationship with devastating clarity. And in that moment, something inside them goes quiet. Not the dramatic silence of slamming doors and angry declarations, but the eerie calm of someone who has fundamentally changed their relationship to the situation. This is the silence that Jung identified as transformative. The empath stops arguing their perspective because they no longer need the other person to validate their reality. They stop explaining their feelings because they've accepted that some people cannot or will not understand. They stop defending their boundaries because they've realized that boundaries don't require the other person's agreement to be valid. In short, they stop participating in a dynamic that requires them to constantly justify their right to be treated with basic respect. Jung studied what he called participation mystique, the unconscious identification with others, where boundaries between self and other become blurred. Many empaths live their entire lives in this state, unable to distinguish where they end and others begin. They feel what others feel so intensely that they mistake others' emotions for their own. They absorb others' problems so completely that they forget they didn't create them. And they take responsibility for others' happiness so totally that they sacrifice their own well-being in the process. The silence represents the breaking of this participation mystique. For the first time, the empath is experiencing themselves as a separate being with their own feelings, needs, and rights. They're not merging with your emotional state. They're not trying to fix your problems. They're not taking responsibility for your reactions. They're simply sitting in their own consciousness, experiencing what it feels like to exist as an individual rather than as an extension of everyone else's needs. This reclamation of individual identity is why the silence feels so powerful to everyone involved. The empath experiences a sense of wholeness they've never felt before. Despite the pain of what they're processing, there's a profound relief in finally putting themselves first. Meanwhile, the manipulator experiences a panic they can't explain, sensing that something fundamental has shifted in the psychological dynamic. They're no longer dealing with someone who will absorb their projections and accommodate their demands. They're facing someone who has remembered they're a separate person with sovereignty over their own life. During the incubation phase, the empath is developing new psychological structures that will support their transformed self. They're building boundaries where previously there were none. They're developing discernment where previously there was only acceptance. They're cultivating selective empathy where previously they gave their compassion indiscriminately. And most importantly, they're accepting their own darkness, their capacity to be cold, detached, and unapologetically self-protective when the situation requires it. This is the shadow integration Jung believed essential for psychological wholeness. The empath is no longer trying to be only light, only love, only forgiveness. They're becoming a complete human being who contains multitudes. They can be warm with those who deserve warmth and ice cold with those who have proven themselves untrustworthy. They can be generous with those who reciprocate and utterly withholding from those who only take. They can be understanding with those who are genuinely trying and mercilessly realistic about those who are manipulating. What makes this transformation so complete is that the empath isn't performing these new behaviors as a strategy. They're not pretending to have boundaries while secretly hoping you'll prove them wrong. They're not setting limits as a test to see if you'll respect them. They've fundamentally changed at the identity level. The person who would have absorbed your bad behavior and made excuses for you no longer exists. In their place stands someone who sees you clearly and has made peace with what they see. When the empath finally speaks again, everyone notices that something has changed. The voice sounds different. There's no emotion in it, no anger, no hurt, no desperate need to be understood. Just calm, flat statements of fact delivered with the detachment of someone reading a weather report. This is when the manipulator realizes they're in serious trouble. Because the empath they knew, the one who could be moved by tears and swayed by promises, has been replaced by someone they don't recognize. Jung documented this phenomenon across his case studies as what many now call the door slam, though he didn't use that exact term. He observed that when empaths reach their breaking point, they don't gradually pull away or reduce contact slowly. They make a clean, surgical cut. One day you have complete access to their emotional world. The next day you have none. And there's no negotiation, no appeals process, no second chances. The door has closed, and it's been welded shut from the inside. This isn't cruelty on the empath's part, though it may feel that way to the person being cut off. it's survival. The empath has learned through painful experience that certain people will take advantage of any opening, exploit any moment of weakness, misinterpret any kindness as an invitation to resume old patterns. So they've removed all openings, they've sealed all weaknesses, and they've redefined kindness as something they give to themselves first and to others only if there's surplus. The shift from emotional shock absorber to indifferent observer is complete. The empath who used to feel everything now feels nothing when it comes to you. Not hatred, not anger, not even disappointment. Just the cool neutrality of someone who has filed you under concluded business and moved on. And this neutrality is far more final than any heated argument or tearful confrontation could ever be. Because when an empath stops feeling anything about you, you've become psychologically irrelevant to them. This is what makes the silence so terrifying for those who depended on the empath's emotional availability. They keep waiting for the explosion, the confrontation, the dramatic scene where all the hurt comes pouring out. But it never comes. Instead, they get this eerie calm, this unsettling distance, this sense that they're talking to someone who has already left the building, even though they're standing right in front of you. The empath has departed emotionally long before they make any physical exit, and the silence was the sound of them packing their bags. Jung believed this process represented the regaining of psychological sovereignty. The empath has reclaimed all the power they unconsciously gave away through years of over-functioning, over-giving, and over-accommodating. They've taken back their emotional energy from people who wasted it. They've withdrawn their projections from those who never deserved them. And they've established themselves as the sole authority over their own inner world, refusing to let others' opinions or reactions dictate their reality anymore. For the empath experiencing this transformation, the silence is sacred. It's the space where they remember who they are beneath all the roles they played for others' comfort. It's where they hear their own voice after years of amplifying everyone else's. It's where they feel their own feelings without the static of others' emotional broadcasts drowning them out. And it's where they make the decision that will change the trajectory of their life, the decision to trust their perceptions completely and act on them without apology. If you're the one who has gone quiet, trust this process. Don't let anyone rush you back into communication before you're ready. Don't let guilt make you break your silence to soothe someone else's discomfort with it. And don't let fear of being seen as cold or mean make you explain yourself before you've completed your internal work. This silence is your cocoon, and you get to stay in it until you've fully transformed. Anyone who truly cares about your well-being will respect your need for this space. The silence teaches you something crucial about relationships. The people who deserve access to you will wait patiently for you to be ready. They won't manufacture crises to force you to respond. They won't guilt-trip you for taking care of yourself. They won't spread rumors about you being difficult or dramatic. They'll simply hold space for your process, trusting that you'll return when and if it's right for you. And the people who can't do this reveal themselves through their reaction to your silence. Jung observed that the awakened empath becomes a living mirror that reflects reality without distortion. They no longer soften the truth to make it palatable. They no longer protect others from the natural consequences of their actions. And they no longer perform emotional labor to maintain relationships that drain them. This mirror quality makes authentic people feel safe and seen, while inauthentic people feel exposed and uncomfortable. The empath doesn't have to do anything to create this effect. Their very presence, grounded in their reclaimed sovereignty, does it automatically. The transformation is complete when the empath realizes they're no longer seeking validation from others. They trust their own perceptions so completely that others' attempts to gaslight them bounce off harmlessly. They value their own judgment so highly that others' opinions become interesting data points rather than determining factors. And they honor their own needs so consistently that others' demands for self-sacrifice are met with serene refusal. They've become, in Jung's words, individuated, a whole person who doesn't need others to complete them, but can connect authentically with those who've done their own inner work. This doesn't mean the empath becomes cold or disconnected from humanity. It means they become selectively warm, consciously choosing where to direct their considerable gifts. They still feel deeply, care genuinely, and love powerfully. But now these precious resources flow toward people and causes that deserve them. They've learned that indiscriminate compassion enables dysfunction, while strategic compassion promotes growth. And they've made peace with being called selfish by people who benefited from their previous self-neglect. The awakened empath develops what Jung called psychological discernment, the ability to accurately assess who is safe to be vulnerable with, and who will exploit that vulnerability. They learn to recognize the difference between someone having a bad day and someone having a bad character, between someone making mistakes and someone making choices, between someone who is struggling and someone who is manipulating. This discernment protects them from repeating old patterns while allowing them to remain open to genuine connection. Have you ever experienced this sudden silence where everything became clear, where the mental fog lifted and you saw your relationships exactly as they were, without the distortions of hope or fear? That clarity is your consciousness trying to protect you, trying to break through years of conditioning that taught you to doubt your own perceptions. If you're in that silence right now, know that you're not alone. You're part of a pattern Jung identified across his extensive work, a pattern of psychological evolution that transforms those who have been exploited into sovereign beings who can no longer be manipulated. The question isn't whether to trust this silence. The question is whether you'll honor what it's revealing to you. Will you act on the clarity you're receiving, or will you talk yourself back into old patterns because change feels scary? Will you maintain the boundaries your silence is helping you establish, or will you let guilt erode them the moment someone cries? Will you trust that the discomfort of transformation is more valuable than the familiarity of dysfunction? Comment below with the words, "I am listening," or "I am watching," to affirm your commitment to trusting your own perceptions. Let this be your declaration that you're done silencing your intuition for others' comfort, that you're done explaining away red flags because you want to believe in people's potential, that you're done setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your silence is speaking volumes, and it's time to trust what it's telling you. The empath's silence isn't an ending, it's a beginning. It's the first chapter of a life lived on your own terms, guided by your own values, protected by boundaries you no longer apologize for. It's the moment you stop being what others need you to be and start being who you actually are. And that authenticity, that sovereignty, that self-possession, that's what Jung believed was the ultimate goal of psychological development. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not endless accommodation, but conscious choice. Not self-sacrifice, but self-respect. There's so much more to discover about how our minds protect us, how our intuition guides us, and how our silent knowing often contains more truth than all the words we've ever spoken. The empath's silence isn't the end of their story. It's the beginning of their sovereignty. And that's something worth paying attention to. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.